Abusiafo ena ya sheda afa topic bi so ana ye pese ye nim edi hu enkomo. Unse ye enkomo a ye nim die over the years and I say over the months, over the days, it boils down on issues, some political issues, say yeah economic, say yeah finance, say yeah social. Ana ye nim edi hu enkomo. Ana ye nim edi hu enkomo so a na mo so mo de madwen kire aba sene mo so madwen kire eyemo e de fa enkomo ene mo adi ne ho na sometimes mo de mo comment nso eba na in the comment no ana obi a mesusu se oye NPP ni epese ohu the issues wa ekotia eye the New Patriotic Party anase Covid-19 ene Ukraine Russia war ensusu aso a ede ba Ghana so na fe ne NPP for anye ne yie na so wo hwe eye NDC currently ene ma wo mo aye ne yie ene ne nanka NPP for ebetimi aye ne yie a wo no mo anye ne yie enti we no ye ne wo e be breaking it down. You go back as far back as 2019 through to a year 2024. Ebra Ghana for eto aba edema a year the National Democratic a year Congress. Na omonso ombefa Ghana akunyano from 2025 ono mo the aircraft how things have overturned since that time. Enti this is going to be an extensive but informative discussion. Ebia obeye interested in this particular conversation. Enti se unsubscribe to our channel any day kwanso obe subscribe to our channel. Na se unfa comment so ema ya odo comment beba na video no so one like e dey amai. In 2019 ana yaria no friend no yaria kudiyewuo kwabena 19 Covid-19 ebe hete ewiase afa na nyina 2019 na sabre no na mi wo school later in the year 2019 December mu ho ana chese yare no eyi niti na report chese China ana chese yare eyi niti. Well, there are what we call conspiracy theories and yet since that time conspiracy theories be no eban ebinum kra kire se sa yare no yare a it was biologically manufactured enye ade a na natural kire se yare a eno a ana kire se eba na emum no obi na share da etena se e lab and or manufacture. Well, given that was the case, it still happened. Emma a man for bebre no ana ehwe wo mo. In fact, China na yare no sha send there were a lot of people that died as a result of that disease. In 2020, in the early months of 2020, that time no na me wo school mu na me wo me final year ewo K.N.U.S.T. Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Na March 16th, na His Excellency Nana-Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, Addo Gagai, Addo Showboy, Addo D. Ye friend of presser. And briefly reminding about the deadly disease. I hate the globe, the entire world. And as president, no supposed to protect the man for no. It became necessary. Say His Excellency Addo Akufo-Addo. Obeka bibi e dey actually man for because people were anticipating some kind of a statement from Nana-Addo Akufo-Addo. Na sa time no na ye sukufo no kra no na ye pese ye kofie. Enti obia atena so na me kai vividly 20 March. Ebra Nana-Addo Akufo-Addo press conference and we declare say now he has declared a lockdown. Na be hwe school mu. Me see ye twisoloku sa ma de chen adan a say yenko fie na omanya chese asem no kwese His Excellency Nana-Addo Akufo-Addo eka ase yenko fie no na yatwiso a yehijama saa ma ade echen adan a yesi yenko fie saa time na ye betwere yen final year exams enti ye final year exams no kora no yekotwere ni fie yekotwere no e wo fie e ma ye graduation 2020 ene ye wie school no ye no virtual yete ayi laptop wani ye bo din a na o picture abeto ho saa na ye graduation na 2019 saa yare ebaye the Ghana economy was on a nice trajectory inti ha and was ye hye no so no. In fact the 2019 a year shock eto nipa a year lockdown wa Nana-Addo Akufo-Addo na ban e ka say it is necessary say oloke a year country ne down no. He made some certain statements say you can recover the economy but you cannot recover the lives of people. Enti the reason tia ema Nana-Addo Akufo-Addo at the time I know a president edema Ghana for and he said well the economy there you can recover it. However, when the lives of people are lost you cannot recover those lives. The trajectory of the Ghanaian economy was on positive trajectory. Well, we in America, it is there. You can verify. The Ghanaian economy was growing very, very fast. In fact, as of 2019, our economy had grown up to 6.5%. Your GDP. That was how fast it was growing. Ebra lockdown no buy a pet. You see, that is when the government, says he thought so well about the people of Ghana, and he locked down industries. Teachers were not going to work. Just Obia was not going to work. And you see, when that happens, it means your economy halts. There is no sales, there is no production. Even if there is production has reduced drastically. It's the production reduced there. It is the production that is accounting for the gross domestic product. See, domestic there, then it means that your economy is going to shrink. Your GDP will shrink. And as your economy shrinks and your debt balloons. Now, how did Ghana a debt balloon here? Our debt balloon because the government saw it fit. Say, well, me man for say my lucky woman down. How do I sponsor people who are not going to work now? Engineer the government stimuli no, and I say stimulus. The government allocated 100 billion Ghana cedis. At the time, it was worth about $17 billion. Now, that $17 billion was money that was spent. Some went into businesses. And the ordinary people didn't get. It was just the government and its cronies. They had business. Those were the people that had the stimuli. This is not my saying. It is clear. So 17 billion. Now, say 17 billion. Ebra, your economy is in hot. The global economy is also in hot. Now, 17 billion. And we try the amount for. It was from that 17 billion. And in free electricity. And in free water. So households were getting free water and then free electricity. In fact, that ballooned our debt. And you see, because your production is less, you are not producing much, you are not getting much revenue, and you be spending more, your fiscal gap widens. You got a fiscal gap where government, near expenditure, any revenue. Now, your revenue is small because And you might exporting because of the global pandemic, export has ceased. So ADDC is it has reduced. And in your man, exporting, reserves, you are no more exporting them. Or even if you are exporting them, the production has reduced until you are exporting less and importing more. Of course, Ghana is an import-driven country. So a country that is import-driven, you can't manufacture and export. It means that your fiscal gap will keep widening because now your expenses is far greater than your revenue. It means that you have to borrow additionally. Sustain your government. Now, as one more in 2022, say you're free COVID-19, still now we are trying to recover. And it will surprise you, say, after, say, you see, a year 2020, ending of 2021, the Ghanaian economy has shrunk from the 6.5 to about 0.5. Let's say, economy need to say, pansam. Well, some of the factors could be attributed to a year COVID-19 and some of the decisions that the government take here. But you see, the NPP government overemphasized and I say over-relied on COVID-19 and the Russian-Ukraine war. And he said, okay, read the IMF on report from the by 2025 now. Say the NPP relied heavily on the Ukraine and the Russia war and the COVID-19. But what they did was mismanagement. They mismanaged the resources that they had. Because effective governance, and it said, managing the resources, the scarce resources you have at your disposal efficiently, so that it reflects positively in the lives of the ordinary Ghanaian. And in the midst of crisis, our government saw the need to spend more. Now, this is not what I'm saying. This is what the IMF says. So the government of Ghana mismanaged funds. And they were physically indisciplined. Just said, yeah, no see spend this, no see spend this, spend this, spend this. So in 2022, Ukraine and Russia war so I didn't know about now, because of the debt we kept accumulating, now our debt to GDP as at 2022 reached over 80%. So your GDP, a kankwa a womb, the debt forming part of our GDP, was over 80%. Interestingly, at a point, na Ghana GDP, the debt to a year, the debt to GDP ratio, it was over 100%. Aden, just say ya boka ama. Just say your economy, it is being crippled by debt. Just a man for car the day the woman. It's about the sound na ma situation abaye dire. Now it was in 2022, and Ghana recorded one of the worst inflation in history. When inflation in Ghana recorded here, and it was that same year. And the cedi depreciated about 50%. The worst the cedi has recorded in history. 50% in a single year. And the cedi at the time was regarded as the worst performing currency. Now, that was how bad the impact of COVID-19 and Russia-Ukraine war impacted the Ghanaian economy. Not just that global shock. However, as a result of mismanagement by the government at the time, and it was not just the shock, because every shock in one somewhere, our NPP friends, so they were overemphasizing, over relying on the impact this global pandemic, global shocks, have a year on a year the economy. No, there were other countries who were doing fairly better. In fact, even if you take some countries within West Africa, there were some countries that were doing better. So that justification is neither here nor there. It was in 2022, and Ghana recorded the worst inflation. Inflation peaked around a year 54%. And then, just say, every month you could experience over 50% on the market price of an item. So, a year 100 cedis here. The next month, over 156 cedis. That was how bad the Ghanaian economy went. Now, it became dire that we needed a bailout. Now, the bailout, and a friend domestic debt exchange program. Now, the domestic debt exchange program was an IMF a year only resort to Ghana. Say, if you are going to get the 3 billion bailout, then we needed to take that decision. And the government, opposition, because they were insensitive. Being insensitive, saw the need, say, okay, well, if this is the last resort, which, and now, me know a year discussion be about Gabi Asare or Cherished, or say the domestic debt exchange program was the necessary evil, which the government of Ghana at the time, led by a year Nana-Addo Atta, had to do in order to save the economy. And Amaka on one breath said, if your other counterparts, countries, had other ways of safeguarding their economies, because the global pandemic, Covid-19, and then Russia-Ukraine war, in fact, it is still happening now, and 2026, it is still going, it is still ongoing, right? And all these other countries are almost, they were affected by the Russian-Ukraine war, because Ghana imports wheat. Similarly, other West African countries will import wheat. Now, the problem as a country relies on the fact that we are import driven. So long as we rely on import, there was no way it was going to end. This crisis was going to stare at us in the face. Now, it became necessary. Say the government of the day at the time, now was some drastic measures. It was the only solution to save the economy. And by saving the economy, it means IMF had to give us 3 billion a year credit facility. And the government, any bond holders, pensioners, bond holders, individual bond holders. This is how difficult the situation is, and you should bear with us. During that same period, you see, that is how you can say sometimes, and then if you are a government and then you are doing, listen to the opposition kakra. In the midst of all this crisis, na masam kukuru close to $100 million a year to hope. If we were able to even erect Cathedral Apokranoa, well, the kind of bashing you are receiving now, and but what we could do with $94 million, and it's a to hope in the midst of such crisis. Now, on a year domestic debt exchange program, what people had to go through, and you see, sometimes if people are saying, Ken.Ofori must come. Well, they are not doing it because of emotion. They are doing it because of what they went through as victims of a year domestic debt exchange program. Now, the domestic debt exchange program, this is how it worked. In 2022, going into 2023, and the government, say, and if you don't take any drastic decision, it will collapse the economy. And Omwa na omu hodi local debt instruments, and as debt security, bonds, and locally foreign denominated investments, omu nyina had to come into agreement. Say this is how far the country has gone. Into country na kwa him. Into momwaye. And yes, I dey your mind will collapse. And if the government collapses, if the country collapses, there will be no government and there will be no central bank to even secure kind of investment. Initially, some people did not agree because why should the government's own mismanagement result to me? An ordinary citizen, should result in investment getting confiscated. Engineer government say, well, you get haircut. Now the haircut, came as a result of say we investment in Eberson 20. Currently, we are in 2026. So investments in Eberson 2026, end of 2026. Say, if you are taking your investment in 2026, then you get 0 coupon rate. So the coupon rate ranged between 0 to 15%. Now, say a year after, then you get something reasonable. You get something 1% and above. So until you extend a year your maturity date to about 15 years, where you reasonably get some good a year interest payment. Now, near man obey Diana was say ye nuanom ene ye papa nom ye papa ye maame nom a omo ye investors in these government debt instruments, bondholders, because they were taking the interest payment. So T-bills and they were taking the interest and then leaving the principal. Ekobane sa no omunya something monthly and I say yearly. So some who needed money to buy drugs were not getting because the maturity date had been extended, some to about 15 years. Now, what the government did actually brought some relief to the government and not to the people. It didn't say government, oh yeah, dear. Now say it will not help your citizens. You think through. Because again, side effect here, COVID-19, Russia-Ukraine war, it did not just impact Ghana, it impacted a lot of countries. So if it impacted a lot of countries there, then what did other countries do that the government could have done in order not to land us in such situations, that domestic debt exchange program? It means that they failed woefully. The MPP government failed. Because if you have a lot of people demonstrating, even former chief justices, it means that it was worse. It was not good. But again, that is what Gabi Asare Ochedako said. Say it was the necessary evil which the government had to take in order to save the economy. And in fact, it saved the country some interest payment. So, in economic, and as in fact, deferred payment. Because if the government was to pay interest in Sihon this year about 60 billion, it means that that 60 billion could be freed and above in reducing our fiscal gap. Because 60 billion, which was the expected amount our government will be to me as saving, right, in order to receive that credit facility the IMF was going to give us. That payment was deferred to about a year, 5 years time. So it freed the government in a certain manner. Emma government, in a year credit facility, and of course it reduced our debt to GDP ratio to substantial levels. And at the time they were leaving office, the NPP was leaving office, it was around 63%. You can fact check this. Now, and the NDC for saw. In fact, the Ghana people saw say the NPP collapsed the economy. They didn't perform well, so they had to give the economy to the NDC government. And the NDC government, ever saw a year what have they done differently? Well, the fiscal discipline. It is what is helping us. Fiscal discipline. The government is not spending unnecessarily. You see, in as much as His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, we're lucky because we have shored up your gold reserves. And your gold reserves, a lot of a year USD in reserves. UTA report to a year Bank of Ghana by close to the end of a year 2025. Government had export of about $8.5 billion. The first time we are recording such a year surplus. And the government prioritized the fiscal discipline. Say, I will not spend unnecessarily. And any time this kakushim, first kakushim. Baby, I was say ye tria kano ye betria. Baby, I was say this kakushim ye this kakushim. That was basically what the government was doing. The government looked at its budget and was spending within its budget. Even if there was any threshold, the government made sure say it was not going beyond that threshold. The government also store a lot of gold. And with the current price of gold, the country a lot of reserve. So you see, the government ain't anything. It only adhere to fiscal policies. Or government, expenditure, government, revenue. Now, how do we ensure we spend within our means? That was basically what the NDC government did. And making sure, they are putting these fiscal policies in place. And as a result of NHS Ghana, see, yenya a stable currency. Anna, yen debt to GDP, it is currently around 45%. And in fact, Osha, it was going to, our projection, was going to take effect in about 2028. And we have achieved that in 2025. It means they must be recommended. However, now the economy has started recovering again as a result of these drastic measures here. The government at the time, the NPP government had to take. Say Mobekaya and Che Anakojo Ponkroma, a can't be edifa the CD stabilization. Yes, in the last quarter of 2024, the CD began to stabilize. In as much as it was high at the time, it began to stabilize because it gained. And NDC for every far abano almost so atwas. That is good and it is commendable. But you see, they could have done better. The MPP could have done better because their counterpart countries, did better. And the NDC is not doing magic, they are capitalizing on the economic status of the world now, and they are making sure the ordinary Ghanaian benefit from that economic changes. Of course, crude oil price is down. The Russian-Ukraine war is still ongoing. However, they have managed to make sure things have eased. Inflation is down, in fact, to single digits. Fuel is down. In fact, fuel has been down since the beginning of 2025. We have entered 2026. Fuel is still down. The dollar has stabilized. In fact, the CD has stabilized. And now some item prices have also stabilized. To the point some items have also reduced in price because of disinflation Ghana yenya. So that is the story. This is the story surrounding COVID-19, Russia-Ukraine war, and what the NDC government is doing differently to ensure the gains are or no more are consolidated over the years is maintained. Begin to say when you watch video Island TV Plus. Over like a video you watch and subscribe it. My young about the global pandemic and what it meant for the average Ghanaian. and what the NDC government, after taking a year office from NPP for, they are doing differently to ensure that the average Ghanaian enjoys some, ease in their daily lives.